Thank you once again for joining us here at Radio Juxtapoz. My name's Doug Gillen, and along with my co-host Evan Preco, today we're in conversation with the American-Israeli artist Addam Yekutieli, more commonly known as No Hope. Adam's just come off the back of a month-long residency in New York, so we use this as an excuse to sit down and have a chat. As always, myself and Evan have a bit of catching up to do, so if you want to get straight into the interview with Addam, skip forward to about minute 10. If not, just kick back and enjoy the ride. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you like the channel, subscribe to it, tell your friends, do all that stuff. Enjoy the episode.
And we're back.
We're back in the game.
It's nice to be back on our routine.
It is like so sweaty here. We almost broke records for the hottest temperatures in the history of the country, and it's amazing because like the BBC on the news are like, "Oh, we can do it, guys. We nearly broke the record." It's like, what do you want us to do? Like, just go turn our cars on and leave it? We'll just, guys, everyone, turn on all your appliances quickly. Let's use more
also,
energy.
like, why is that something that the world wants to happen? Like, so record heat is not awesome.
They've turned climate change into a game. It's so weird.
Because it's the inevitability is just it's thick.
It's
you
like,
know,
hey, we're gonna burn
really
the planet down. We might as well have a little fun while we do it. How about you, man?
I apologize that you're in deep weekend evening time right now, and I'm still kind of midday.
I've had to cancel a friend's party for this. So,
oh, really?
Just saying.
Wait, you could still go?
Of course I can.
No, that's an excuse. You're just using it as an excuse.
It's currently 9:15, and I'm over 30, so it becomes very dangerous leaving the flat at this time. When I was 25, it would be like, okay, cool, 11 o'clock.
Yeah,
that's no problem to leave and go to a party. You get to 30, and it's like, this is unlikely.
Yeah, I'm going to Japan tomorrow, and it's like I need like at least 2 days of like quality sleep before going because I'm like I just can't anymore.
So. Nice segue. Tell me, what's in Japan?
Actually, it should be a really cool week. The clothing brand and art, art supporters, Ruka, are doing a Beautiful Losers / AMP quarterly takeover around Tokyo for the week, and I'm gonna go out there and cover it in multiple different ways. But it's neat because I think off the heels of the Beyond the Street stuff. I'm into camaraderie at the moment in the art community, and I feel like this might be another like nice week of a bunch of different artists, Barry McGee, Steve Powers, Ed Templeton, all that crew. Just a kind of a different group of people having a nice kind of art week.
Do we think that there's a chance that in the next episode of Radio Juxtapoz we might have a little special coming from there?
Yes, I think we will. I think that'll be one of the upcoming episodes, which is always great because it's always fun to have a bunch of jet lag people on a podcast. It slows it down. You know what's interesting though about the last 3 ones we've done, the last 3 podcasts, and the one that we just are about to show you with No Hope, with Addam. All of them deal with like this idea of home, not home. It's like I weird how we got into that theme of like 3 artists who were all kind of talking about home in a really, really interesting sort of kind of a nomadish sort of kind of way. I don't know. We didn't plan it that way, but it really worked out nicely, I thought.
It's just a concept that so many people, because we are in kind of like it feels like it's easier for people to move around a lot. And, a lot of people have come, especially in the arts, they've kind of come from these very different and eclectic backgrounds. So it's like this concept of home is something that everyone has something that they can say on it, and it's always kind of comes into something different as well. So I like that we can play around with that.
Yeah.
That idea a little.
And
bit.
all 3 of these stories are completely the Icy and Sot, Madsaki, and now Addam, I think are all they're so different, but there's this nice continuing theme that I think is an unintentional but intentional kind of topic we've touched on, which I think is good for the time that we're in. I also want to plug something. Can I plug something real quick?
Sure.
I want to plug the new Juxtapoz black and white book that came out this week, and we're very, very proud of it. So please go and buy it and support print things.
Before we get into the interview with Adam, I'd like to take a minute just to pay respect to the Polish artist Robert Prosch, who recently passed. Robert was an incredibly talented painter, muralist, animator, and a lot more. It really does feel like he was just in the start of what was promising to be a blossoming career and a lifelong dedication to the arts. His death was felt all over the art world, and our thoughts are with those that were closest to him. Robert was an artist that left this world far too early.
Yeah, and his every series of paintings he did just got better and better. I wanted to thank Andrew Hausner for writing a really nice piece on Juxtapoz.com last week in the middle of kind of all of that. It was really nice of him to do that. Another really talented person that left us too early.
So our guest on this episode is one of the most interesting and diverse multi-practitioner artists that I think does not deserve being reduced to the term street artist. He is so much more than what you would associate with that brand and that term. Text-based, illustrator, abstract, just really plays with concepts, themes, metaphors. If you are about to listen to this podcast and you haven't really had a chance, and I never normally would say this, but especially with No Hope, I really do want you to take a couple of minutes and just have a sit through Google and just look at some of his projects and really kind of familiarize yourself with the way that he approaches things, because it's in no way, boom, you've painted a mural, you've done a thing, here's a painting. There's a real different approach to it, and the final result is just kind of one element of a multi-layered project and concept.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is something that you kind of, calling him a street artist seems like it seems so limiting to like the fact that he's such a conceptual kind of, he's got such a conceptual practice and interactive and pretty, in many ways, like a very highbrow practice. Not to say street art doesn't have highbrow qualities. You know what I mean, though? Yeah, it's like it's almost like Jenny Holzer-esque kind of conceptual style, and you really do need to give yourself a little bit of a Google image search or go to his website and kind of see how the work is applied to different places and the words that he uses. And we do mention a couple projects by name that unfortunately, if you're listening on a podcast, you really do have to get your phone out and kind of do a little Google search to really understand kind of the connection between why we're asking those questions and his answers.
There was a really good video by the MZM Projects team from New Art back in 2018. That alone will just give you an understanding. It's worth to watch. That alone will give you a nice understanding into kind of how he approaches, going to a street art festival and just taking it in a completely different way. Really makes text-based art cool.
Absolutely. I like the way that he is able to take this work that he built up from growing up in Tel Aviv, and ironically born in Orange County of California, which is funny in many ways, and how he's able to apply that now to the rest of the world. And it seems like the rest of the world is catching up to some of the things that he's talking about and doing, sometimes not for the better, to be quite honest. But for his practice, it was forward thinking at the time, and now it just feels like he's gotten even more confident in some of these more kind of abstract ideas, which he's definitely one of my favorite artists in the world, I have to say.
First of all, thank you for taking some time out.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Is it as warm where you are? Like
it's crazy hot.
I've had to turn my fan off. I've had to close my door, and it's like 30 something degrees here. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. So it's really good that this is only going to be audio, because I am just going to get sweatier and sweatier as this conversation continues.
Pretty much in the same situation as you.
Okay, cool.
No fans, closed doors, closed windows.
Cool. This will be the time I tell you that when I woke up this morning, it was 52 degrees and foggy in San Francisco. So sorry, everybody.
I miss that. I want that.
Sorry.
It's just the British way. We get the one day of summer and we're like, no, not for me, thank you. Just give me back the rain. That's where I'm comfortable.
It's that Boris Johnson burn that you're getting right now.
Hey man, look, we're not gonna go there. We're not gonna go there yet. So look, Adam, give us an idea, a sense of where you are just now, where you're talking from.
Too soon.
Oh man, the wounds have not healed, my friend. It's still fresh.
I'm currently in the studio area of my apartment that I've been staying at in Bed-Stuy. It's part of the Bed-Stuy Art Residency. I've been here for the past month, and I've just been living and working here for the past few weeks, and there's another week left, and it's been real.
What's your relationship like with them in New York? Are you a fan of the city? I guess it's got the same kind of similar energies and chaos that you would get in Tel Aviv, I guess.
I've been coming to New York for a while now and spent a lot of time here throughout the years. This time has been a bit different. I've been kind of like in hermit mode, been locked up in the studio. So it's a bit of a different kind of like New York experience that I'm used to, which is usually, leaving in the morning and just like running around all over the city until you get home late at night. But it's been nice. It's been nice to see it at a different pace, at a different, different vibe.
Yeah, I always feel that with me. Whenever I go to New York, it's like every time it's a different experience. Every single time I get like a different sense, a different pace, a different project, a different place. And every time it feels like just looking at New York for the first time again.
Yeah.
What's your relationship to residencies, though, in general? Do you get in a hermit mode when you get into the residency program, or are you one that kind of every single one's a little bit different?
I think it depends what the residency is and how long it is. Like I've done shorter ones. I've never done one that was so long. And I've done like residencies that have kind of revolved around, like in a lithography studio or a silk screening studio. And those have been shorter and kind of revolved more around printmaking. But yeah, I'm pretty much, I think in all times kind of tend to just kind of stay in and focus. Like for some reason, having this, longer period and longer kind of time to be in it, I didn't expect to be as locked up as like in like shorter ones, but that's how it happened.
You say locked up as if it's like some sort of punishment.
Some sort of external force.
Yes. Literally, a guy has locked you in, and this is a cry for help right now.
Yeah, I don't have a key.
Blink twice, Adam, if he's keeping you there against your will.
But what are actually the parameters of this residency, though? Like, what is it? What's the end goal is a show and a presentation of the work that you made, right? Like that's kind of the goal of the Bed-Stuy residency.
Well, there's an open studio. It's happening this coming Monday. But pretty much the program is very, it's very easygoing in the best way. They provide with a like studio and living space, and you're pretty much free to do whatever you want, work on projects, work on a series of artworks, work towards a show. There's no really like predetermined agenda, which is very nice. And
do you feel that does have an ability to change your approach and how you're sort of coming up? Do you think that time where you are kind of given a space and you're kind of all the normal constraints are taken away from you, do you see a different tact from your headspace? I
do. I like what's been strange is realizing how much of like the framework and like deadlines and stuff I do need, and how much it does help me. Yeah, it just helps me organize my head a bit. So it's been surprising how fast a month can go by, and how like the unstructured days, I feel that the days have been going by so quickly, which is interesting. I thought it would be exactly the opposite. I thought it would be like an endless amount of time, and each day would be like I would be able to cram so much into it. Yeah, it's been nice. And it's also been nice because usually, like my studio is separate from my apartment, and here it's kind of like in the same space. So it's allowed me to kind of like go in and out of work, which has been nice. Like I generally have always worked better at night. And ever since my studio has been separate, which has been like the past 10 years or so, I stopped working at nights. And it's been nice to be able to have that kind of like quiet time. And
Do you
and be
find
able
yourself?
to.
Are you quite a rigid with your structure? Because if you don't, it can just be like it's quite fluid, and you'll find yourself, like you say, you'll find yourself, picking up a project at 3 a.m. and just being like, oh, okay, I'll do this now. Or do you sort of fix yourself some kind of timeline for you to dedicate work and then just switch off from it, or is it just kind of all present?
I think mentally, I don't really switch off. Mentally, it's always going on, always kind of preoccupied with whether it be thinking about work that I want to do or just trying to figure out logistics, and kind of I'm always mentally preoccupied with it. But in terms of actually working in the studio, it is, it's pretty structured. Like I go there in the morning and come back in the evening. But it wasn't like that before. Before I moved the studio out of my apartment, it's been a while, a really long time. But but back then I would work until like 5, 6 in the morning, and I would live on an entirely different schedule than the rest of the world, and it became not as practical at a certain point, but also very productive and prolific in terms of like studio work.
It's amazing how much work you can get done when no one else is bugging you for stuff.
For sure.
When everyone else is sleeping, it's a tranquil time to be able to just kind of actually find that peace and that energy that you need to be able to tackle something. I was gonna take this back into more like just kind of you and your story. So you were born in the U.S., but then you moved to Israel, to Tel Aviv. And so for you, what is there a sense of kind of, and I know it wasn't New York that you were necessarily from, but even when you returned to the US, is there a sense of coming home that you feel, or for you is Israel very much home?
I don't know. That's something that I try to, I think about that a lot, where I consider home. In many respects, Israel is my home, but I also am very much connected to the U.S. in terms of like culture. And I was born in California and lived there till I was almost 10, and then moved to Israel. In the first few years of living in Israel, I didn't want to be there.
Because you were 10 and you were taken away from all your friends, of course.
Yeah, and everything that I was into wasn't really happening in Israel at that time.
And then in hindsight, you were taken away from Orange County, and then you kind of shrugged and said, well...
Exactly. Then a few years passed, and it became to, I came to like appreciate not being, first of all, like being in Israel and not being in Orange County. Yeah, I think, it depends on what level. Like I feel that there are many things about American culture that I feel very connected to, and there are many things that I have difficulty with upon returning here.
As a 10-year-old, what was the biggest change, the biggest shock, the biggest culture shock for you that you can remember looking back as a young man now, looking back to when you were 10? Does anything stand out?
I remember school being much more insane. I remember like arriving to class and seeing like kids throwing chairs and like yelling back at teachers and stuff like that, which wasn't happening in California at my experience, I guess, at school. Yeah, everything was just more. Yeah, there were a lot of I didn't speak the language either, so kind of for the first year or so, I was kind of like fumbling around in terms of like trying to find myself and find my place.
So you didn't speak
socially.
You didn't speak anything.
No, I knew some words. My dad spoke to me when I was much younger, like 2-3 years old, and then I lost it entirely. Luckily, it came back pretty quick. Within a year, I was speaking fluently, and then yeah.
Do you ever think, okay, had I had to grow up in California, in the United States, what perhaps the direction of your artistic endeavors would have been? I mean, because your parents were artists, so there would have been some sort of artistic practice, but obviously it would be different just by the nature of it.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know if I would if I would be making art. I think that kind of living in Tel Aviv, and in terms of like the type of city that it is, and kind of like my relationship with it, I started making much more art when I started doing work outdoors. Because I'd always been making art and drawing until then, but it was really when I started doing work in the street that it really kind of created this massive paradigm shift. And I think that my work and the kind of topics that I deal with and the subjects that I speak about in my work are very much informed by growing up and living in Israel, and kind of like the political situation, whether it not be in a direct sense, but more how the political situation kind of informs the overall, social dynamics in a place. Yeah, and I think it would be tremendously different if I didn't kind of like go through my like beginnings of my artistic development and finding like my voice in Tel Aviv.
But then that dichotomy, right, of having the backdrop of living in Orange County, which is like the home of a certain kind of skateboard, surf, outdoor culture, and then having at least experienced that and then going to Tel Aviv creates an even weirder sort of dichotomy and sort of visions of where you were coming from in the street culture to like where you were now growing up in as a teenager. There's like a weird kind of like freedom versus sort of, you don't think twice if you're skateboarding in Orange County or doing whatever. But in Tel Aviv, the street culture is just so much different. But you had both of them.
Yeah, well, and I think for, now a lot of it has changed in the past like 10, 15 years. But when I first moved there, it was pretty, it existed, but it wasn't, compared to California, it was almost like non-existent. And for the first few years, I really wanted to, that I think was what I was really longing for. And I was really trying to kind of recreate that in my own way. All my interests were interests that other kids my age at that time weren't really into, in terms of like music and skateboarding. And
when you say that, when you did go out and do your first piece in the street, was this kind of like you alone, or were you with friends, or was this something that you kind of just took on as yourself, as a way of saying, look, I need an outlet here. I need to let this out, and you kept it as something very personal, or was it just kind of, a couple of friends out, causing trouble?
Well, when I started doing work outside, that happened kind of at a later age. Than when I moved, I was kind of like, I think over, like not as much preoccupied with the actual like cultural transition and stuff like that. Yeah, it was kind of realizing that I could do it, that it was possible, and that I could take all the work that I'd been doing until then, kind of like not knowing really what to do with, and create kind of like extend its life and extend its interaction and its reach by kind of putting it in this collective reality, which is like the city, and allowing it to be part of that fabric, part of that, those dynamics. And it was something, I think the first thing that I ever did outside was like a series of weed pastes, and me and a few friends, it was my posters, but a few friends of mine, we just walked around and put a bunch of them up. And then after like one or two times of doing that, it was just, I was the only one that stayed interested in doing that.
Was this something that you would see on the surroundings anyway? And what was the kind of the street work around Tel Aviv at that time? Was it all politically charged? Was there stuff that wasn't?
Well, there was a very tiny bit of graffiti. Tel Aviv has, I look back on those times very fondly, because back then there wasn't really there wasn't a street art scene. There weren't too many people. There were a very, very, very small group of people that were doing stuff outdoors. But it was nothing close to like a scene or anything grandiose. What I liked about that is that there were a lot of people that had nothing to do with street art or didn't know anything about street art, that they would kind of like, just make a stencil that was kind of like a private joke between, their group of friends. go down to the street below, do 3 of them, and then never do anything again. So you could tell that the people that were doing stuff outdoors were, doing it just for very pure and kind of like untouched.
They weren't doing it because they wanted to get, Insta fame and to go viral.
Yeah, and it was a different time in terms of, how well street art was known, and everything kind of like comes in a bit of delay to Israel. Not as much these days because of the internet and social media and stuff like that. But back then it was very it was very pure, and there was something that was very very nice about that, especially looking back in hindsight.
I might have the year wrong on this, but you said something in the Juxtapoz interview last summer about when you went to New Art in 2008 and you were doing work on the street. It was like kind of the first time you had done work on the street in a place where there was like no conflict. Like there was no sort of like, Norway doesn't have any sort of political tension on the street, so to speak, at least not in 2008. When I remember reading that at the time, I thought that was a really interesting thing, that you had been creating work with the backdrop of a certain kind of conflict. And then when you bring that work out into different cities that may not have it, like how that you might have had to adjust your approach to making art, or if you'd had to adjust at all.
Yeah, my work has always kind of like been informed by my surroundings and the environment that I find myself in. And while I do, deal with social or political topics that are, generally made in correspondence with the place that I'm at, and like Israeli reality and Tel Aviv, I've always tried to kind of address these topics from a more like emotional or human standing point. So when I would be speaking about a political issue, I would try to create an access point that is through kind of like a more minor emotional human situation. And I find that also allows a broader potential for participation, for identification, or understanding. But it also adds kind of like a more universal, a universal approach to it, or universal portrayal.
What are the kind of initial stages of how you start to put meat on the bones of a project like this? Like, how do you begin to approach something like that?
It depends, because sometimes I'll have an idea for a project, and then I try to find ways to realize it. And sometimes I'll be invited to a place, and then it kind of starts from that point, trying to tailor a project around where I'm invited to, which was in the case of Stavanger, that was kind of what happened. The one that I'm working on now, which is it's a project that deals with scars and borders, and it's very much tailored or created in correspondence with the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. So it's a project that I'm documenting and creating an archive of scars. And later I'll be using these scars to create a reimagined map of the region, and kind of like a human atlas of sorts.
Like a Frankenstein looking map.
In a way, yeah. So, but it's also kind of attempting to create kind of like a sentimental portrait of the region. That kind of starts with the initial metaphor or analogy between scars and borders, and the similarities to how both things are created, how our relationship with both things take place. There's kind of like this metaphorical connection in the sense that both are created by circumstance. With both, we have a dynamic and complicated relationship later on. Sometimes it's looked back on in a traumatic light. Sometimes it's a nostalgic light, and both heal in different ways. And so that kind of starts from that initial metaphor, and then builds on to creating the framework and kind of like the structure of how the project will take place and what it'll look like in the end.
Well, on the topic of scars, like one of my favorite pieces you've ever done was the 246 sides of a story. Is that the mural? And the idea of scars and the things that we leave behind, and the stories and the history. It's kind of that's still very prevalent in there. those lines and those poetic sentences that you came up with for that project, or in general, like are these things that you accumulate over time that you write down?
Just for the purposes of the listener, can you maybe also just give a little richer understanding as to what the project is that Evan's describing?
Yeah. So
Thanks, Doug.
246.
It's only our 17th or 18th episode, Evan.
I just think everyone has fucking Google image search. God damn it! All right, go ahead. Sorry, Adam.
Yeah. Well, basically, the building was caught in the crossfire of the 6-Day War. After which, when Israel, quote unquote, won the war, then the Green Line, which was basically the ad hoc border between Israel and Palestinian territory, was annexed and became part of Israel. So the building was caught in that crossfire and is full of bullet holes from the fire exchange. And basically, what I did is I created a large-scale index. I numbered all the bullet holes and assigned each one a sentence and a phrase, something that also would allow to kind of understand what our sentimental relationship almost with a historical event and such a defining historical event. And so these texts in my work, it depends what project I'm working on. Sometimes the texts are phrases that I write, and that I either, in that case, they were all written for the specific piece. I do have, I'm always writing, a lot in my sketchbook. I always have a large supply of text. Sometimes the work is kind of extracted from, with a lot of the projects that I do, I collect testimonials or letters from participants. And then I extract certain fragments from their words and use them and kind of recontextualize them. In the case of the Jerusalem piece, it was all almost hypothetical thoughts that I could have existed to, in the minds of people that were there then, that are living around it now. They're kind of almost like philosophical meditations on the event and its outcome.
What are the kind of responses you get from something like that? Not necessarily with the people that you've engaged to participate with the dialogue and are essentially become part of the project itself and are part of the artwork in a different way. But when you're doing something that it's kind of like it's quite objective, it's poetic, it's humanist, but it's also, it's right at the heart of this. Do you get kind of like fired up responses from people, or are people just generally okay with it?
I think that people are more or less okay. I try, with my work, while it does deal with kind of heavier issues, the execution, I try to make it more subtle, more suggestive, less kind of declarations, and more kind of suggesting a situation that people can interact with in different ways. So it's not, a lot of my work isn't really kind of confrontational or provocative, even though sometimes the contents that I deal with and the issues that I deal with are. And I think that also kind of relates to what I was saying before about dealing with these issues kind of from an emotional standing point, that it's to create a certain accessibility, a certain access point to bring as much, for it to be as accessible as possible, to kind of encourage as much engagement and as much reflection on behalf of people that might not want to deal with these issues or be part of this type of conversation. And so it kind of like breaks down, or I attempt to break down these kind of like defense mechanisms in order to allow that to happen.
So you don't get like nasty letters from like hardliners on either side about maybe talking about topics that they don't want to be put out onto a large multi-story building on the Green Line?
No. Not yet. I don't know, but that also means maybe that the work isn't strong enough. So
is this like a nudge? You're not provocative enough.
Yeah, or maybe people are just indifferent. So that's also an option.
One thing that kind of interests me, is there a difference in your mentality when you're using your words to how you're using someone else's?
I think there's a lot more responsibility when using other people's words, especially when putting them in a new context. Of course, all the participants in the project, they know that a large part of the idea is to recontextualize it and to take their words out of their original intention and context and place it in a new one that will probably change the meaning. But the phrases and kind of text that I choose to extract out of the context of not only the overall text but the sentence, they become very abstract almost and very open-ended, and almost don't. And I don't mean this. I mean this in the kind of best way possible. They almost don't mean anything specific once they're taken out of the original context. And I think that allows a lot more flexibility in terms of the new context that I'll put them in, and the meaning that they'll have. I think when it's my text, then it's more, I feel more, at liberty to
manipulate.
Yeah, and to kind of paint a more layered or textured picture with the words. And it's it's a way of it's a different way of corresponding, because a lot of times, when it's not my words, it's kind of like using a ready-made almost, and placing and using it as one would create like a collage. Whereas with my words, it's more kind of like, painting a picture or something like that, if that makes sense.
That situation where you sit down, and especially with the collective heartbreak, where it was, it was really intimate, and you're getting people to open up their kind of like deepest vulnerabilities to you. Does that kind of become like a weird therapy session?
Yeah, it's not the original intention, but it is definitely something that happens. And I know, I can't speak on behalf of the participants, but I know that it definitely is therapeutic for me, and I'm experiencing it even more now with the SCAR project. Because I meet the people, and have pretty kind of like a crash conversation with them that deals with very personal and intimate content. And I know that for me, it's extremely powerful, going through my own physical complications, but also having them share, because I think that a lot of times, these aren't necessarily topics that people tend to reflect about normally, and kind of creating this situation where people kind of focus on that and write a letter or write a certain kind of like testimonial about a scar on their body creates an opportunity to kind of rethink it in a different way and share certain things that aren't normally shared. For me, it's extremely therapeutic, just because it's kind of creating this mutual moment between me and them.
Like, I'm just trying to picture that situation. Do you just kind of like present yourself and just ask them like a question and see what you get, or is it like a two-way dialogue? Are you opening up with these people as well?
Yeah, that's something that I really try to make a point to do, because if I find that if I'm requesting that level of exposing oneself or vulnerability, then it not only makes sense, but I need to do the same.
You need to participate just as much as they are.
Yeah, it just feels that it's the only way that it can be done.
Would you say that all of your projects in some sort of way are ongoing projects? Like, do you close the book on a particular project, or is everything sort of open-ended to you that you can revisit years later? Because it seems like all the things that you've worked on, at least in the last 10 years, can be revisited in fresh ways and never just be like completely closed.
I do feel that the majority of the projects are projects that also deal with time passing, like with my Truth and Method project, which is a project where I tattooed phrases onto people from, the phrases were originally from outdoor pieces of mine, street pieces. And then I tattooed those same texts onto them and documented them in their daily lives, allowing their personal narratives to create new meanings. And that's something that, while I did, I've had a few exhibitions revolving around that project, but it's something that I continue to document and want to revisit. And because in a way, in that specific project, it's like something that I almost let go from my own personal control and authorship. And then, my role in that is to follow up and see how it's manifested throughout time. And so, that project is a good example for just how, the factor of time is such a significant part of the concept. There are projects that do have a start and finish, but it seems that I do have like between 3 and 5 kind of projects that are just extended.
I was thinking both truth and method and also taking sides being things that could just kind of both follow the path of the world in its own way, even without your participation in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Taking sides is also a good example of that, because it can just, every city that I do a series of interventions in, the pieces are created in a site-specific manner. And yeah, actually, I'll be doing a series of that in Jerusalem next month, which somehow, out of all the places that I've done that project, I've never thought of doing it in Israel, let alone in Jerusalem. So it's going to be a pretty intense project.
I imagine that will be relatively intense. Is that you just kind of like throwing yourself once again right into the epicenter of it?
Yeah, we're trying to kind of, Jerusalem is such a melting pot of, culturally, politically, the amount of different realities that kind of exist simultaneously in that city is outstanding. It's really almost unfathomable. And so I've been trying to kind of find locations that are unofficial borders, certain areas that are kind of like transitioning from one reality to another, whether it be between secular and Orthodox, Israeli and Palestinian, and we're dealing with a lot of historical areas that have gone through transformation with time. So we're trying to create an installation or a series of installation in as many different areas as possible around the city, and deal with the different issues that are found there. And it's I'm really looking forward to it, because I feel that out of all the places that I've done this project, it might be one of the more relevant places to deal with like the idea of territory.
I would think so.
There's no question about that. One theme that is kind of recurring in your work, and this is actually interesting because I kind of almost extend this to both of you, because the notion of patriotism, it means it's a term, a concept I hear come so much when I read and I hear about things kind of coming from the US, coming from Israel. And you guys have this really indoctrined sense, from my perspective as a guy from Scotland, where we don't have, we don't pledge allegiance to anyone. We don't have that unbearing sense of like instilled on us of, you do your duty to your God and your country and all this. Like we kind of have an idea of it, but I feel like where you guys are, where your experiences come from, it's like a hyper reality from what I understood. And at that time when you were growing up, and like I said, this is a question for both of you, is that sense of patriotism something you're aware of through school when you're doing a Pledge of Allegiance, or when you're being told to send presents to the IDF? Was that something that you were aware of, which was a sense of indoctrination? And if so, how do you feel looking back on that as a concept?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, okay.
There was a lot of words there. I hope there was a logical question within there.
Adam, I don't know what year you were born. I was born in 1981. And growing up in Northern California, which is probably its own specific kind of oddball area, to be talking about patriotism. But I was growing up, being American meant that you had immigrant grandparents who worked really hard to get over to America to open up a business or start a business and pass along their traditions of their past homelands to the kids, and the kids grew up in America, and that was the American dream. I think and that was patriotism. That was it. I think it's changed so much now. For the new conservative movement has changed what patriotism is supposed to mean and what it represents. And I don't quite know if I will ever be able to live up to the new conservative lexicon of what it is to be a patriot, because I don't know if it's changed and it's altered and it's re-altered to whatever the specific conservatives are in charge. And I think it's become more of a war cry as opposed to a unity thing. So as an American now, when I hear patriotism, I think of being exclusionary and not inclusive. So I don't know. I just feel like when I was younger, it felt more about being inclusive, and it just doesn't anymore. That's changed probably since 9/11, I would say.
I think also it's changed. It's changed throughout the years. When I started, I think it was probably somewhere around like high school where I started to kind of understand, that's the time where, certain notions were kind of unlocked for me. And I was kind of, becoming more aware of the reality and the place of patriotism in Israeli culture, which I think in Israel, it's kind of its own breed. Like you said, kind of giving gifts to, or just the general presence of Israel is a very militant country. Yeah, there's an obligatory military service that everyone needs to go to. And so, and all the older siblings have gone, everyone's parents have gone. And from a young age, that there'll be a time where you will be called for that duty as well.
Adam, the inevitable question that I'm going to have to slide in here, and you can choose to just ignore this and we can edit it out. Adam, did you do your military service?
No, I didn't. I managed to dodge the draft, so to speak.
Nice. You did a Trump.
Yeah, I faked a mental disease.
Okay.
In order to get out. That's pretty much the only way to get out of service.
Yeah, I have a question, Adam. Like for, in America, like patriotism is now like it's part of like watching American football or watching baseball. Like they give you like 2 national anthems. Like you really gotta like, it's like it's so indoctrined now into just like kind of banal activities. Is that the same thing in Israel where they've kind of embedded it into even the most just kind of escapist kind of moments, but now it's like they blend the patriotism into those escapist kind of things too?
No, I think it's in a way it's almost the opposite because I feel that it's very the political reality and climate of Israel is very present. There's no real way to escape it, no matter who you are, what side of the political spectrum you're on. Tel Aviv in a way is kind of like a bubble. It's kind of like its own ecosystem, kind of like how you briefly mentioned about Northern California being kind of like separate from the rest of the US in many ways, just in its way of like being more associated with like more liberal thought. Right. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I assume that might have been what you meant.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's why I always feel like slightly out of touch. And I'm sure New Yorkers feel the same way, just out of touch with like explaining what is going on in the country.
Yeah. And Tel Aviv in a way is also like that, but also in that kind of it's so ingrained in everyone's psyche that even without kind of dealing with it on a like direct level, you're always kind of dealing with it on a psychological level. And also just because of the ongoing and ever present conflict, there's not really any way for it not to be present in your daily life. Everything, there's always something imminent happening. And I feel that that's a bit different than other places because other countries that you can kind of be disconnected or aloof to certain things, whereas in Israel it's not really a possibility. Yeah, and when you think of the narrative of Israel, and it's such a young country, and how it was, after what circumstances it was established and what has happened since then, and kind of like this metamorphosis that it's gone through. Patriotism also, I feel, has gone through a large shift and transformation since its the state's inception.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think too in America, like a liberal's not allowed to be patriotic because the conservatives own it now. So it's like you can't. It's a weird. I feel like America is going into that place where the ever-present conflict is now everywhere, whereas before it felt like there was like this little bit of window of leisure that one could have where everybody could get along, and that just seems like it's completely eroded.
Yeah, and I think also because of the size, Israel is such a small place that you're literally and like physically with everything that's going on and all the different types of people that are living there.
I'm going to throw it back to where you are. Your studio open studio, which is Monday, which will be the day that this podcast comes out. So from whenever you're listening to when this podcast comes out, if you're in New York, where can we see it? When can we see it? What can we expect to see?
Well, since the podcast is coming out the same day, it's happening right now.
Until when?
It's happening. It's one night only from 6 to 9.
Oh, okay.
Oh man.
So I thought it was open for a little bit longer.
I feel bad for the people who listen to this on Tuesday. They're fucked.
Oh my god.
Yeah, to stay up with a Juxtapoz podcast.
This will be a good barometer. Maybe some people will be like, "Oh, I heard it on the podcast today," and we'll be like, "Yes."
And it's a cautionary tale to stay up to date with all the Juxtapoz podcasts.
Boom.
I like this. I like this kid.
Boom. That's my new ringtone.
Lesson learned. Yeah, so it's happening at the Bed-Stuy Art Residency, which is located at 475 Putnam Avenue in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, from 6 to 9 p.m.
Adam, thank you so much. And I hope we get to catch up soon. I hope our paths cross at some point. When's that show in Jerusalem?
Well, the project is happening in September, throughout the whole month.
All right.
Yep. Woo!
So there you go. That was an insight into the world of Addam Yekutieli, more commonly known as No Hope. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to the channel, let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time.